3,000 years ago, the most connected world that had ever existed came apart. Not slowly. Within a single generation. Around the eastern Mediterranean, a ring of great powers. Egypt, the Hittites, the kingdoms of Greece, the rich trading cities of the coast had spent centuries bound together by trade, by treaties, and by the letters their kings sent back and forth. Then, one after another, the cities began to burn. The kingdoms fell. The trade routes went silent. Whole writing systems were forgotten. The people living through it sent messages begging for help, and then, mid-sentence, the letters simply stop. This is the story of how an entire world ended, and why, 3,000 years later, we are still arguing about what killed it. To feel the loss, you have to see the world that was lost and let go of the idea that the ancient past was small or isolated or simple. Around 1300 BCE, the Eastern Mediterranean held something the world had never seen before, a network of great powers, all in contact with one another. There was Egypt at the height of its new kingdom, with pharaohs whose names we still know. There was the Hittite Empire, ruling much of what is now Turkey from its mountain capital. There were the Mycenaean kingdoms of Greece, with their palaces and their record-keeping. There was the wealthy trading cities of the Levantine coast, and the powers of Mesopotamia, Assyria, and Babylon, and the copper-rich island of Cyprus. And these were not strangers to each other. Their kings wrote letters back and forth, addressing one another as brother. They sent gifts, arranged marriages, complained about late shipments, and signed treaties. After Egypt and the Hittites fought a great battle at Kadesh, the two empires made peace. And the text of that treaty survives on both sides, in Egyptian on a temple wall and in cuneiform on clay. It is the earliest peace treaty in history whose actual words we can still read. A copy even hangs today at the United Nations. This was an age of diplomacy, of ambassadors and royal marriages, of an international elite that moved between courts and spoke a shared diplomatic language. What held it all together was metal. This was the Bronze Age, and bronze is an alloy, mostly copper, with a crucial pinch of tin. Copper was relatively common, but tin was rare, and the nearest sources were hundreds, even thousands of miles apart. To make the bronze that armed every soldier and equipped every kingdom, you needed a trade network that reached across the known world. We can see that network in a single astonishing find. A merchant ship that sank off the coast of Turkey, its cargo preserved on the seabed for over 3,000 years. In one hold lay copper from Cyprus, tin from as far away as Central Asia, glass from Egypt, ebony, ivory, resin, pottery. From a dozen lands, enough raw metal alone to make tons of bronze. A single ship, carrying the threads of an entire interconnected world. That is the thing to hold on to. This was not a cluster of isolated kingdoms. It was a system prosperous, cosmopolitan, sophisticated. In a real sense, it was the world's first age of globalization. It was also, though no one alive could have seen it, dangerously fragile. Because when everyone depends on everyone else for grain, for metal, for trade, then everyone is exposed to everyone else's misfortune. For now, though, the system worked. The ships sailed, the letters flowed, the palaces filled with foreign luxuries. And then, in the space of a few decades around 1200 BCE, all of it, the trade, the palaces, the letters, the kingdoms themselves came crashing down. The question that has haunted historians ever since is brutally simple. Why? For a long time, there was an answer. And it came dramatically from Egypt. Egypt was one of the few great powers to survive the catastrophe, and its pharaohs left a record of who they believed they were fighting. Twice, a generation apart, Egypt was attacked by a coalition of seaborne peoples. The first wave came around 1207 BCE under the pharaoh Merneptah. The second, larger one came around 1177 BCE under Ramesses III. On the walls of Ramesses' great temple at Medinet Habu, the pharaoh carved his victory in stone, a chaotic sea battle, Egyptian arrows raining down, enemy ships capsizing, and he gave these enemies a name, or rather several. He listed the groups by name: the Peliset, the Sherdan, the Shekelesh, and others peoples. The modern world lumps together under a single phrase: the Sea Peoples. For more than a century, they were cast as the villains of the story, a mysterious horde that came out of nowhere, swept across the sea, and burned a Bronze Age world to the ground. But look more closely at the carvings. Among the warships and the warriors, the Egyptians also carved something stranger: ox carts, heavy wooden wagons piled with belongings and carrying women and children. That is not the baggage of a raiding party. That is the baggage of a migration, and it changes everything. The Sea Peoples may not have been an army that descended on a peaceful world. They may have been refugees, whole communities uprooted and on the move, driven onto the water by something terrible happening behind them, searching for somewhere, anywhere, to land and live. Some of them did exactly that. The Peliset, it seems, settled the southern coast of the Levant, and we know them better by a later name, the Philistines. So the Sea Peoples are less the cause of the collapse than a symptom of it, people fleeing a world already coming apart. And there is one more thing to remember. Medinet Habu is a victory monument. It was carved to glorify a pharaoh and proclaim his triumph. It tells us Egypt won a battle. It does not tell us who these people truly were, where they came from, or what they were running from. For that, we have to look away from the boast on the temple wall and toward the cities that did not survive. while Egypt held, the rest of the connected world did not. Consider Ugarit, a wealthy port on the Syrian coast, one of the great trading hubs of the age, a city of merchants and scribes, and overflowing archives. In its final days, its last king, Amurapi, sat writing letters to his neighbors. One of them survives. In it, he answers a desperate plea for help with a plea of his own. "Enemy ships have appeared," he writes. "They have already done great damage. His own ships and troops are away, and his country lies open and undefended. The help he was asking for never came." And here is the haunting detail. The clay tablet he was dictating had not yet been fired and filed away. It was still drying when the city fell, and the fire that destroyed Ugarit baked it hard, preserving it. We can read his last words today precisely because of the catastrophe that ended them. Ugarit burned and was never lived in again. And it was not alone. Far to the north, in the Anatolian highlands, the Hittite capital Hattusa, the seat of an empire that had stood toe-to-toe with Egypt, was abandoned and then burned. The Hittite kingdom, one of the superpowers of the age, simply ceased to exist. Across the sea in Greece, the Mycenaean palaces, Mycenae itself, Pylos, Tiryns, were destroyed, one after another. And the writing system the Mycenaeans used, the script we call Linear B, vanished along with them so completely that the Greeks would forget how to write for the next 4 centuries. Up and down the coasts of Cyprus and the Levant, the pattern repeats town after town, a layer of ash, a sudden abandonment, all of it falling within the same few decades. Stop and notice what that means. This was not one city's bad luck. It was not a single war or a single unlucky king. The same catastrophe was striking dozens of kingdoms across thousands of miles at almost exactly the same time. And that synchrony, the fact that it all happened at once, is the real clue. Because no army, however fearsome, burns the entire eastern Mediterranean in a single generation. Something larger was happening. Something underneath. So what could bring down a dozen kingdoms at once? The Sea Peoples can't carry the blame. They were probably as much victims of the collapse as a cause of it. So historians went looking for something big enough and broad enough to strike everyone together. And the evidence has been emerging from some unexpected places. The first answer is written in the climate. At the bottom of a cave in Israel, mineral deposits record thousands of years of rainfall, and they show a long, deepening drought settling over the region near the end of the Bronze Age. The rings of ancient trees tell the same story. In 2023, scientists studying tree rings in Anatolia pinned it down with startling precision. A severe drought lasting several years, striking right around 1198 BCE, almost exactly when the Hittite Empire fell. A drought like that means failed harvests. Failed harvests mean famine. And sure enough, in their final years, the letters from these kingdoms speak of hunger and of grain, moved in desperation from one place to another. The Hittites, masters of a mountain empire, were reduced to begging Egypt for shipments of grain in letters that call it a matter of life and death. A superpower that could no longer feed itself was already quietly falling long before any enemy reached its gates. Then add the Earth itself. Geologists have found evidence that this same window saw a cluster of powerful earthquakes across the region, what some researchers call an earthquake storm, shaking palace after palace, perhaps over just a few decades. And add people on the move, populations driven from their homes by hunger and ruin, pressing into the lands of others. The sea peoples, most likely, among them. Any one of these, a strong kingdom might have weathered. A bad drought, a hard war, a great earthquake. Civilization survives single blows. But here is the heart of it. The late Bronze Age was not a set of separate countries that could fail one at a time. It was a single, interlocking system, every kingdom leaning on the others for grain, for metal, for trade, for stability. So when the shocks came together, they did not stay contained. A drought in one land cut the grain that fed another. A burned city broke the trade route that supplied a third. A famine sent refugees crashing into a fourth. The collapse of one palace economy pulled down the next and the next like a row of dominoes. The very thing that had made this world rich, that everyone was connected to everyone else, is exactly what made it come apart so completely and so fast. It was not one enemy. It was not one disaster. There is no single villain to point to. And that, in the end, is the most unsettling answer of all. The Bronze Age world was destroyed by the same force that built it: connection. It was, you might say, the first system too big and too entangled to save. When the dust settled, the world that emerged was almost unrecognizable. The great palaces were not rebuilt. The long-distance trade routes, the ones that had carried tin across continents and luxuries between courts, fell silent for generations. Cities shrank to villages. Whole regions emptied of people. And perhaps the strangest loss of all was writing itself. In Greece, Linear B did not evolve, or simplify, or get replaced. It simply disappeared. For something like 400 years, the Greeks kept no written records at all, an entire civilization that forgot how to read and write and would not learn again, until it borrowed a new alphabet from the surviving traders of the Levant. Think about what that means. Almost everything the Bronze Age knew, its trade routes, its songs, its histories, its skills, the names of nearly everyone who lived, went into the dark with it. Not destroyed in a single fire. Just no longer written down, no longer passed on, until it was gone. There was one quiet consequence that would outlast the darkness. With the long-distance tin trade broken, bronze itself grew scarce, and people turned to a metal they could find closer to home: iron. The age that the collapse ended was the Bronze Age. The age it ushered in, slowly, out of necessity, was the age of iron. The world that rose from the ashes was forged, quite literally, from a different metal. We call the centuries that followed a dark age. And the name is honest not because those years were empty, but because we can barely see into them. The lights of the records simply go out. Sit with that for a moment. A whole connected world, its kings, its harvests, its writing, its memory, went dark within a single lifetime. And the people living inside it did not know. They wrote their letters and planted their fields and expected the next season to arrive the way it always had. They did not know they were standing at the end of an age. They almost never do. There is something uncomfortably familiar about it. For all that we have pieced together, the collapse keeps most of its secrets. We still do not know who the Sea Peoples really were, or where they came from, or what, exactly, drove them onto the water. We do not know the precise order in which the kingdoms fell, or how much was drought, and how much was war, and how much was simply fear spreading faster than any army. Most of the people who lived through it left no record at all. What we have are fragments. A burned city's last letters. A pharaoh's boast carved on a temple wall. The silent layers of ash beneath a dozen ruined towns. From those scraps, we are still trying to reassemble the end of a world. And yet what remains is enough to feel the weight of it. We do not know the names of most of the people who lived through it. We know only that in the city of Ugarit, a scribe pressed a last message into wet clay enemy ships on the horizon. The country undefended, and then the letters stop. Baked hard in the fire that took the city. An entire connected world, with its kings and its harvests and its writing and its memory, went dark within a lifetime. They did not know they were living at the end of an age. We almost never do. It is tempting to look for a single thing to blame, one enemy, one disaster, one moment when it all went wrong. But the Bronze Age world teaches a harder lesson. The thing that made it strong was the thing that made it fragile. It was connected, prosperous, interdependent, and when enough shocks struck at once, those same connections carried the failure as quickly as they had once carried the grain and the gold. Complex worlds do not always fall to a single blow. Sometimes they simply come apart. And we are still listening for them. Every year, a new rainfall record read from a cave or a tree ring, a new layer of ash carefully dated, a new fragment of a broken tablet pieced back together, brings that lost world a little further into focus. Slowly, patiently, out of ash and clay and the rings of long-dead trees, we are recovering the story of how a world ended and of the people who lived through the ending without ever knowing its name. If Forgotten Worlds and Lost Ages find you, subscribe and stay close. There are more of them. Somewhere beneath the hills of Greece and Anatolia and the Levant, the rest of that ending is still buried in cities not yet dug, in tablets not yet read. The whole connected world fell silent 3,000 years ago. We are only now learning to hear it again. This was Echoes of Earth. The rest is still buried. The last clay tablet of Ugarit, its cuneiform catching the light, fading into the dark.